Welcome to the Fan of History and the timeline of world history. Here we'll try to tell the story of us from our earliest ancestors to the present day. This will incorporate a journey through the ages, covering the simple hunter-gatherer societies, birth of agriculture through to the first towns and cities, kingdoms, empires, wars, and so on. We will also be covering art, philosophy, religion, architecture, science, and literature. So if you're ready, fasten your seatbelts, as this is going to be a long and bumpy ride. The time machine is set, and off we go! 200,000 BC, we're in the middle of the Paleolithic, or the Old Stone Age. Homo erectus, who had come out of Africa 1.6 million years ago to migrate into Europe and Asia, was still thriving in China and parts of Southeast Asia. In Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals had emerged 350,000 years ago from their ancestor Homo heidelbergensis. But in Africa, things were about to change, and another offshoot of Homo heidelbergensis was about to emerge into the prehistoric record in Eastern Africa. This was Homo sapiens sapiens, or us, anatomically modern humans. The earliest date for anatomically modern humans is believed to be somewhere in the region of approximately 160,000 to 200,000 years ago, known as mitochondrial Eve, after the membrane found in most cells and the biblical Eve. This woman, according to researchers, was the common female ancestor of all humans living in the world today. This theory suggests that there is an unbroken line on the female side, passing through mothers and mothers until they all converge into one particular person. As all mitochondrial DNA is passed from mother to offspring, this DNA in every living person is descended from that one female ancestor, only differing by mutations that are really insignificant, such as skin color. The theory is not without criticism. Some geneticists have stated that the method is flawed and claim that the interpretation is dubious, some even believing that it did not support the hypothesis of an African origin for all humanity, or support the recent replacement of humans coming out of Africa. However, even though the dates differ for mitochondrial Eve from 200,000 to 99,000 years ago, DNA tests have concluded that the out of Africa hypothesis is accurate, as we will see later on. For actual physical evidence of the earliest Homo sapiens, we need to travel to the banks of the Omo River in southwestern Ethiopia. Between 1967 and 1974, hominid bones were discovered and recovered by Richard Leakey and colleagues from the Kenya National Museum at Omo Kibish in Omo National Park. Known as Omo 1 and Omo 2, the bones consisted of 2 partial skulls, 4 jaws, a leg bone, 200 teeth, and several other bones. Omo 1 remains displayed modern human morphology with some primitive features, whereas Omo 2 showed some archaic traits. Previously they were thought to have dated to 160,000 years ago, but in 2004 a survey of the geological layers around the fossils found that they were dated much earlier, to 195,000 years ago, making these remains the oldest known Homo sapiens found anywhere in the world. These Homo sapiens would actually evolve into subspecies that was discovered in 1997 at Hertubori in the Middle Avash site of Ethiopia's Afar Triangle. This subspecies, known as Homo sapiens idaltu, consisted of 2 adult skulls and one of a 6-year-old child that had been found shattered into 200 pieces. All 3 skulls had signs of distinct cut marks that suggest that their flesh had been removed for cannibalistic purposes. However, because the skulls had been polished, the current theory is that the flesh had been removed more for ritualistic purposes. Did we start to conceive of religion already? It is too early to tell. Also found were remains of hippopotamus and buffalo, suggesting that these people had a meat-rich diet. So we have found some bones suggesting some of our ancestors were living in Ethiopia, but they're still not quite ourselves. So we have now reached the peak of the Eemian stage interglacial, a period of warmer and wetter conditions that lasted between 130,000 and 115,000 years ago. The weather was so warm that hippos managed to flourish in Germany and southern England, and forests reached the northern reaches of Norway above the Arctic Circle. During this period, some groups of Homo sapiens had migrated southwards to the tip of southern Africa. And at the Clasius River mouth caves in South Africa, 3 main caves and 2 shelters at the base of a high cliff have revealed evidence of a middle Paleolithic associated human habitation. A 20-meter thick accumulation of deposits inside and outside the caves prove that these people knew how to hunt small game, gather plants and roots, cook by roasting on hearths, and later fish, and manage their land by fire. They did not, however, have the internet. Other evidence suggested that this site was only used on a seasonal basis before moving on to other hunting grounds. A dark side to humanity was evidenced by fired blackened fragments of skulls and other bones discarded with other food remnants, which suggested possible evidence, like at Hartubuir in Ethiopia, of cannibalism. An extended wet period known as the Abbasia pluvial changed the climate of North Africa that lasted from 120,000 to 90,000 years ago. What is now the Sahara Desert was a lush and fertile ground fed by rivers, swamps and lakes, attracting wildlife that would normally be found south of this area today. After this, for the next 40,000 years, the climate became drier and cooler as a result of the start of the last glacial period of the Pleistocene Ice Age. The Saharan river system dried up as a result of this, with sea levels below modern levels, as a result of which Siberia became linked to Alaska by a land bridge. Scientists believe that this event was the latest in a series of glacial events from a larger ice age that dated back over 2 million years. That was a period of advancing and retreating glaciers that would last for the remainder of the period that we are covering in this episode. Due to these drier and cooler conditions, a small group of archaic Homo sapiens started to migrate from Africa, either by crossing the Red Sea to Arabia or via the Sinai Peninsula to the Levant. Finds at El School and Qafse caves in Israel represented features that tied in with these archaic Homo sapiens rather than the pre-existing Neanderthals that had been around for some time. Known as the Mousterian culture, named after rock shelter found in Dordogne in southern France, small Levallois and other prepared core types of stone tools were found that indicated that we started to use the same techniques that the Neanderthals had been using for thousands of years previously. Whether there was any contact between these two cultures remained debatable. The Mousterian culture was succeeded by the Arterian culture that lasted between 82,000 and 40,000 years ago. Small perforated seashell beads were found at Taforalt in Morocco, which was the earliest evidence of personal adornment found anywhere in the world. Also found were bifacially worked, leaf-shaped and tangled projectile points alongside the earlier Levallois flakes and raclures. This culture would later spread to Egypt by the end of the period. The earlier migration of archaic Homo sapiens from Africa to Arabia and the Levant became a false start, though, because events in Indonesia would threaten the very existence of our species. An eruption of Mount Toba on the island of Sumatra at approximately 75,000 years ago ejected 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, plunging the world into volcanic winter. Many human groups died out, with estimates suggesting only 1,000 of us remained in southern Africa, causing a bottleneck in evolutionary terms. So all of us are descendants of these 1,000 survivors. Language and symbolism allowed the remaining groups to exchange resources and information with one another that could make the difference between survival and extinction. And the eruption of Mount Toba was a supervolcano, and we have not seen an eruption of a supervolcano in the world since then. The next supervolcano due to go off is below Yellowstone National Park in the US, and it's actually overdue at this point. But that's another story, because now it's time for anatomically modern humans to come to the scene. Residing in safety in southern Africa, some people believe that this was now the period when Y-chromosomal Adam become the patrilineal ancestor of modern-day humans, although some scientists suggest that he lived at the same time as mitochondrial Eve 200,000 years ago. Despite the discrepancies in regards to chromosomal Adam and whether or not he existed, evidence at the Blombos cave in South Africa shows that we started to produce an increasing diversity of bone artifacts, such as the still bay points, bifacially worked stone points with lance heads, laurel leaf or willow leaf shapes, engraving tools, knife blades, and drilling tools. Excavations in the 1990s found sophisticated bone tools, marine shell beads, and a workshop producing 8,000 pieces of engraved or incised red ochre material, showing traces of intentional use and processing. These materials were the earliest example of abstract or symbolic art that led to the beginning of our abstract thought and process that would continue for thousands of years up to the present day. There is also evidence that we started to make use of a variety of land and marine resources, such as tortoises, seals, dolphins, and shellfish. The amount of shellfish found suggested that people would collect them from the shore before taking them back to the cave to eat. Recovered sufficiently from the Toba eruption, anatomically modern humans, or Homo sapiens sapiens, began to make the trek northwards like their previous ancestors, reaching the Middle East 60,000 years ago. From there we started the long process of colonizing the globe. In the next part, we will look at this journey and the implications that it will have on the existing inhabitants, such as Homo erectus and Homo neanderthalensis. Here's a hint, it will not go well for those guys. Plus, the climate is still proceeding along like a roller coaster before it finally settles down by the end of the Pleistocene. So join us next time when we look at the period up to 10,000 BC. If you like, you can support our Fan of History projects like this one by going to patreon.com/fanofhistory. And thank you for watching.